change of pace today. I'm going to be working on a luthier-built instrument from a graduate of the Brian Gallup guitar making / repairing school in Big Rapids, Michigan. What's interesting is that this is the maker's second guitar. Let's have a look at the label. It's one of Royden's guitars, and this is a brave thing to put on the label of a second guitar. Lifetime warranty against manufacturing defects to the original purchaser. 1996. So it's getting up there. Couple of decades, things happen. To start with, there's this, where it was hit with a .38 Special plus P FBI round in a bold daylight jewelry heist. Actually, the story goes, I'm told, that it happened when the owner just leaned on it. And I'd say if your elbows are that pointy, you might want to get them checked for progressive bursitis or osteochondritis dissecans. Here I'll insert a picture of 1970s bodybuilding sensation Chris Dickerson for the visual reference. But yeah, there's another side crack on the other side. This is what I'd consider the classic car key crack. When you play a guitar with a set of keys in your front pocket and lean the side against it, things happen like this. And there's this one. This is probably the most concerning, actually. Anytime you see a crack that runs along the fingerboard extension and it's progressed all the way through to the sound hole, oftentimes it'll warp the rosette and it'll show some misalignment. You're in trouble. It means that the stress of the string tension there has been left to do its thing on a neck that, in this case, is unrestrained on one side, which usually folds inwards, causes the action to rise. Sometimes it can even warp the sides along the neck block and other things. In a case where it's happened on both sides of the fretboard, that's a real mess. Most of the time it's a write-off, to be honest. It can be very difficult to push them back into place. We will do our best. So I've strung this back up to full tension momentarily again so that we can take some measurements and look at the action here. We've got a stout 8/64 on the bass side and about 7 on the treble. And again, 30 years old is pretty close to when we expect a first neck reset on most standard dreadnought style guitars. However, in this case we might get away with not doing a neck reset because we have what appears to be a full height saddle, which hopefully has never been messed with since the original setup. I can't imagine it being taller. It's also leaning forward quite dramatically, but you can see there's plenty of material to work with there, and we should be able to get this back down to a reasonable action height. And we'll find what kind of truss rod, if any, they put in this, because there's considerably more relief in the neck than is necessary. All in all, this is very predictably D18 in design and scope. Brian Gallup started his school back in the 80s. If memory serves, I think he actually bought Dan Erlewine's repair shop that was there in Big Rapids at the time. When Dan, I think he wanted to move and start working with Stumac at that point. So, you know, Big Rapids has a pretty strong guitar connection. The school's been in business for a long time. I think the classes there are fairly regimented in terms of design options. Like, you're going to build the guitar that they want you to build. There's no flights of fancy. But there's also like longer term training available, which is kind of unique. Multi-year programs. You don't see that very often in the guitar world. I've talked to some students over the years, and I've talked with some of the previous staff that have worked there. And there are like varying degrees of nostalgia, put it that way, which I think is probably true of most such schools. The builder of this guitar was an architect by training, which brings a certain level of technical concentration along with it that could be a help. And the fit and finish on this is pretty impressive. Like, you know, if you were to look at it across the room in the right light, you would mistake it for a D18. It's got a really lovely, I believe, Engelmann spruce top on it. Excellent pickguard. And that is a pretty Martin-looking bridge. The headstock is a familiar shape. They don't have a Martin-style nut, though. This has got a flat bottom to it rather than angled, which is a lot easier if you're just starting to build. No volute. but one-piece neck. Well, here's something different. Can you spot it? Yeah, the owner strings this like a 19th century banjo. These outside E's he's got going around the opposite side of the post rather than the usual inside. Is that because there isn't enough clearance between that and the next string, or is it just... I think he assumes it gives him straighter string pull. I don't know. I know it's going to drive me nuts when it comes time to set this up. Loose tuner buttons again. Want to catch those as soon as possible. Yeah, I think I dock you a few marks for that. This has an under saddle pickup in it, and you don't want a saddle that's too tight with an under saddle pickup, because it just doesn't get enough downward pressure in all the places it needs the pressure, and it can sort of constrict the vibrations. However, if it's too loose, you end up with this exaggerated lean, which will eat up any or all compensation you've put on it, and over time, depending on the depth of the saddle slot and other factors about the bridge, like it can actually cause a crack. They'll frequently break off on the front here. So I'm going to snug this up some before we're finished. The area around the upper bout here into the sound hole is dished or slanted downwards. It's been pulled along with the neck. The thing is, even with that slant and dip, the lay of the neck is actually pretty good. It's hitting right at the top of the bridge. So we're fine in terms of angle. I think I'm going to start with this crack on the treble side here. It runs about 3 inches, 75 millimeters, right in the center of the side. Now this guitar does have some side supports that run between the top and back lining in a couple of areas, which is nice because it can constrain this sort of thing from going all the way around the body. This is relatively level. It looks like it's pretty clean, and it's very tight. So, you know, this is a case of just getting glue in there. I'm going to pop some magnets on to hold things as level as possible. And then later on I'll come back with some cleats and just shore it up from the inside. I think I've mentioned it relatively recently that I don't mind using Titebond style adhesives for side cracks. They don't get as crispy as hide glue, of course, but in the case of a side, you know, these are exposed to a lot more, not just knocks, but stuff pressing against them, sort of trying to force them to bend. And I think that little bit of resilience you get from Titebond might actually be a benefit. I can see that as I'm pushing the glue through with my suction cup here, these sides are very thin, which is not uncommon in a luthier built instrument, especially if it's been done with, you know, the old-fashioned method of a hot pipe, because it's easier to bend them the thinner they are. And also, especially when we're starting off, they tend to get a little bit sort of warped across the grain sometimes, and when it comes time to sand them, there's usually some extra material that has to be removed to get them really flat. And in this area of the guitar, this is one of the flattest portions of the side, this section right here. So a side or a rim gets a certain amount of strength from the curves that are pushed into it. Just inherently stronger. If you've got this straight section here, it's just going to be a little bit more prone to damage usually. This crack is so tight that I don't think I need spool clamps. There's always a danger of putting too much pressure on the side and cupping it with the clamps. You can actually force it out of straightness. So I think this is sitting really nicely. I'm just going to let that cure. Now then, is it possible? I don't think I've ever shown this device in a video. It's something I came up with specifically for cases like this where we're trying to straighten out misaligned fingerboard cracks that have broken through the rosette. this is not the easiest task. What's happened is over time the parts have slid past each other. It's a slow tectonic kind of slippage. They're not unglued, like they're still firmly attached to each other, but enough pressure and time they can move. Getting this pressed back into place is going to require some heat. There are a lot of structural members under this area. I have to heat up the fretboard, the transverse brace that runs across, and in this case there's also a fingerboard pad which supports this area between the neck block and that brace here. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick, and it's a little rectangle. I believe the crack started along the edge of that support pad. Here's a teachable moment. If you're going to make such a support, rather than making it rectangular, anytime you glue a straight block with sides that are parallel directly to a soundboard in line with the grain, if there's any seasonal shrinkage or expansion, that becomes a really hard stress point. So it's much better practice to angle that across the grains so that, this is, you can see that it's not cut with sides that are parallel. What that does is it dissipates the force across a number of grain lines rather than having it focus all on one, less likely to pop open. So sometimes this operation works, sometimes it doesn't, but I at least have to try. This is a frame that surrounds the heel, and it bears against the sides, supported by the neck block inside, which is what makes this possible. It's something to clamp against. The surfaces that contact the sides are padded with cork, and I use this caul that's shaped for the sound hole that presses against it and clamps it. I've made these in a number of different radii for different sound hole diameters. And they have cork on them too. I can vary the size slightly with strips of veneer taped to them. The cork kind of equalizes the pressure, so if the radius doesn't match perfectly, and oftentimes sound holes will go slightly oval, I won't be forcing all of the pressure on a small area, which I would be doing if I didn't have some kind of padding on it. So I'm going to put the iron on this, and just as if I was going to lift the fingerboard extension for a neck reset, I'm not going to lift it up in this case. We're just going to let it get good and warm and start applying some pressure and see if we can straighten this side out a little bit. Okay, this is called a sealing iron. People always ask me what it is. Dan Earlywine emailed me asking me about it. It was from a company called Hangar 9. I don't think they make this model anymore that's got this old-fashioned rheostat heat control. I think the new ones have a digital controller, and I think they're probably about 3 times as expensive as this. It's used for like model airplanes and other things for basically heat shrinking stuff, ironing various membranes of planes and stuff. So I don't need blazing heat, but I want it to soak in there well and get everything up to kind of a uniform warm temperature. Should mention I've got the bottom side of this device. I should mention I've got the bottom side of the frame clamped with a long bar clamp, a padded caul on the butt end as well. This area is good and warm. I'm watching the lines of the rosette and the piece of spruce that's in between them. At this point I'm just trying to get it to move. I'm not going to put glue in there. As this cools down, it should solidify again in its new position, and then I can come back and do the glue up like I would any other crack. Okay, that is definitely moving in the right direction. The lines of the rosette are starting to look less kinked. Okay, this has been clamped up overnight, and it's bounced back pretty remarkably. I think I can try and glue it up while the clamping pressure is still on. And with a little sideways bit of zhuzhing, we can probably get it to close completely. Looks like I'm applying pressure from every single direction at once. I'm going to cleat the area under the crack in the unsupported region around the sound hole. I'll clamp it in place and use a mirror to check on the location. It's now time to make some auxiliary side supports, just sanding the edges into a bit of a taper. Turning my attention briefly to the saddle slot, I'm just going to measure it to see what it's like, and it's fairly regular. The saddle is about 7/1000ths of an inch too narrow. I'm going to add some thickness using some super glue on the back side here. It's a good idea to clean the surfaces I'll be gluing for the side supports and cleats. All that dust does not make for a good glue joint. I've got some heavy-duty bar magnets to hold things in position while the glue dries. On the hole here, I was surprised and happy to see that the fragment was still in position there and could be pushed back into place. It was just dangling, so I had to be very careful when applying glue, supporting things with my finger on the inside of the guitar. Get a bunch in there, clean up most of the squeeze out, and then clamp that with bar magnets as well. I'll seal up the surface of the crack using some thin super glue. After that's had a chance to cure, I'll make up a razor blade scraper with 2 pieces of thin Scotch tape on either side to act as a depth gauge. And then it's time to scrape. Followed by progressively finer grits of sandpaper on a flat block. The area over and around what was previously the hole was kind of a divot and required multiple fillings with super glue. To bring back the shine, I've been using these Novus polishes, both heavy and fine. While glue was curing, I worked on reducing the height of the saddle. I knew I had to remove a certain amount. I'll scrub it on a flat block with sandpaper. It's important to check periodically to make sure things are flat and square. This side took a lot of scraping to get level. That looks significantly better. The whole guitar is covered in patina, lots of dings and scratches and stuff. Not too concerned. This had a Martin style truss rod, which needed a bit of a tweak. The treble side E had a lot more space under it than was necessary. It felt very stiff to play. I did some work with the nut slotting file. Well, there we have it. We're all buttoned up. The number of holes have been reduced both in number and severity, and the action has come down to just under 6/64ths on the bass side, just under 5 on the treble, which is a lot more comfortable to play. Chords are no longer as painful as they were, and it's got a nice voice.